Remove carcinogens and get your gear compliant clean with Unimac laundry equipment. Find it at alliancelaundry.com/fire.
Welcome to Mental Health Monthly with Dan DeGrice and Chris Muscle.
All right. Welcome to another edition of Mental Health Monthly. My name's Dan DeGrice, my co-host Chris Muscle, and our special guest, Chief DeYear out of Dallas Fire. Chris, how you doing?
Good. How about you?
I'm doing well.
Yeah.
Doing well. 5 years in retirement, and it's looking good on me. Although you might notice all the stuff behind my back. My wife said, "Hey, I got to get all the things out of the closet," so I had to go put it all in my office. This is what happens after 30 years. So kind of like the Chiefs' background.
Yeah, mine is clearly lacking. We're working on it. So.
Well, cool. Chief DeYear, where do we find you?
I'm at my house in Plano, Texas.
Okay, Plano, Texas. Well, welcome. We appreciate you being on the show today, and Chris is going to do a little introduction.
Yeah,
okay.
Chief DeYear.
Please correct him if he missteps on this. Yeah. He likes that.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, originally from the Bronx, New York City, right? Started up there, came down to Dallas, spent almost 10 years in Carrollton Fire Department, which is right here in Dallas-Fort Worth. And then actually went over to the State Department. That's kind of cool for a couple of years as an international fire marshal, traveling to over 35 different countries. It's pretty neat. I didn't even know that was a thing. And then went to Dallas and spent 32 years there. So 45 years in the fire service, long time. And I think it's cool that you retired from the fire department, but you're still giving back, which we'll talk about through your teachings and then your work on the Health and Wellness Committee for Texas Commission on Fire Protection as the vice chair, and then the chair of the Firefighter Advisory Committee. So still very much plugged into the fire service. Anything major that I missed?
No, that's pretty much it. I'm doing quite a bit of teaching for a lot of area fire departments, and I do a lot of keynote speaking now. So that keeps me pretty busy. A lot of my friends think I'm busier than I was when I was working, on the job. But and every now and then I feel like that, but most of the time I'm not. I'm kind of doing things at my pace, so it's not a problem.
That's cool.
Well, the good thing, Chief, is that you get to do it on your own terms, right? You're not being told by somebody else, unless it's the wife to take out the trash or mow the lawn.
Oh yeah,
we're kind of in similar situations, but the same thing is now the landscape kind of. I mean, you've been around a lot of different areas, but the landscape kind of opens like, I can do that. Yeah, I can do that. Next thing you know, your calendar's full and you're like, oh, wait a second.
Yeah. I think so what we're going to talk about today is really mid-level leadership and mental health, right? And the company officer, the battalion chief, the deputy chief, and really how that plays into it. And you rose the ranks through Dallas and retired as a deputy chief. I know you spent time in training and EMS and prevention, but you spent a lot of time in the operations, deputy chief in operations on shift, responding to calls and whatnot. And so I think that's the theme today that we're going to talk about.
Great.
Yeah. And just to be clear too, for anybody that's watching, is when we say mid-level management, I mean, some people might think, okay, like a captain or a battalion chief, and that could possibly, depending on the rank structure. Dallas being a big department like Chicago or New York, you have a lot of other chiefs. Like people say a chief, and in some departments it's two people. In Dallas's department, there's many layers, right? So take it for what it's worth in your own department, because a captain can be the third highest rank out there, but a captain in Dallas is, the second. And then as you as a deputy chief, you're really in between the frontline personnel and then all the other assistant chiefs. And like in our department, we had commissioners and so forth, which were upper management. Is that fair to say, Chief?
Yes, sir. Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's start, Chief DeYear. So going, 43 years, 45 years, that's a really long career. So how has the conversation around mental health changed over your career, right? I was we did a podcast live from FDIC, and we were with a few guys, and I had made the comment about, mental health 25 years ago, and they kind of laughed in a good way. They were like, that wasn't a conversation 25 years ago at the kitchen table in the firehouse, right? And then
no, absolutely. Matter of fact, I had been on the job in my mind about almost 8 years before I ever heard the term CISM. That term had never, in my world, and I don't know this to be true, but in my experience, 1985, I was involved in a very big incident, and it was I can tell you, it was August 2nd of 1985 was the Delta 191 plane crashed at DFW Airport. And I was involved as one of the first responders that day. And several days later, they had a big meeting, and it was in an auditorium. I want to say it was like a theater, but it wasn't. But it was like a big room, and it held a bunch of people all faced in one direction. And I remember a gentleman coming out and speaking, and they referred to CISM, and that's the first time because I remember asking, like, what does it stand for? Before, up until that point, I was never aware, that you hear the joke from my generation. We came from the world where, you just rub dirt on it and you just kept moving forward. And that was the generation that we came from. But that was the first time I had ever realized that there was something else that addressed the word mental health. I don't think that word was even used at the time. It was just our well-being or just checking in on the guys. And there was no formal counseling. There was no nothing, but that's the first time I'd ever heard about it. So as my career moved on, obviously we became much more in tune with, the critical incident stress debriefing and the fact that things needed to be done. But it doesn't go back 45 years. It clearly doesn't go back that long. So I think we're making great strides today, but I think, in my career, I think this whole thing was evolved.
It did go back if we talked about the bars, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're right about that. So, and it's funny you mentioned that. So this is an opinion, but I think in my mind, in 1980, if anybody was struggling with anything, relationships, finance, death of a parent, your health, or whatever, the network of people you worked with, you could rely on. You could bring the conversation up at a kitchen table while you're eating breakfast, and then maybe 3 hours later, somebody pulled you aside and you were sitting on the bed of a pickup truck in the parking lot, and they were asking pointed questions like, "Hey, it sounds like you're struggling. Hey, sorry to hear about your mom." Whatever. And you had a conversation. And in my mind, I think there was some benefit to that. Of course, there was no official anything. Nobody said, "Hey, you need to go talk to a counselor." I don't think that was even an option. But there was a community of people who cared that you would talk with and you could vent to, or that you could, you shed a tear, or just, have somebody listen to you. I'm not sure that exists in the same exact manner today in 2025.
Yeah. I think you're probably pretty accurate, but the other side of it too is things change and generations change. For us, though, and I think back to the late 80s and early 90s, is to be invited to that was like, hey, you're not like you're in, but you're a part of something. And even when we had to re-roof our houses or tear out our bathroom or tile the floor or something like that, there was inclusion. And if you were asked to do that, there was that, people talk about brother and sisterhood, but there was that connection, and you would go home no matter if you spent 2 hours or 20 hours at somebody's house and come back and go, "Oh, that's pretty cool." And, that's something for Chris and the, Generation Alpha that's coming out is, do they have that, and how do they have that? And I won't go down a rabbit hole. I know that a lot of them do that through the internet and through gaming, but I don't think that's the same thing as sitting next to somebody and having somebody put their arm around them. And yeah.
Well, there was that community thing, like you said. I mean, if I can remember, there were times where somebody had an emergency, or they had a flood in their house, or a pipe broke, or like you said, they just needed help. And I remember like rescheduling my day off, whatever I had planned, so that I wouldn't miss that, because that was part of the brotherhood. That was part of the camaraderie. And, it's just like somebody moving, like if you, Chris, if you called me up and said, hey man, I'm moving next week. Today, it doesn't look like it did in 1980 or 85 or 90. In 1980, I would have said, hey, what time you need me there? And you might say, hey, I'm hiring somebody. You're good. Don't worry about it. It's like, okay, but I at least offered. But if you said, yeah, I could use some help, I came over. Now, there was expectation that there was pizza and beer involved as the afternoon wore on. But that's where you get to learn about people, right? I mean, you see people away from the job, and you get to vent, you get to talk. I mean, yeah, the community existed. I mean, it was there, and that was our mental health support network back then.
And I think it's really good to mention that, especially for people listening, because I was just having this conversation with a guy yesterday, where you feel like in today's world, you hear those stories. And even when I started, there was still a little bit of that. But in today's world, whether it's 24-hour shift, 48-hour shift, whatever your schedule is, like you go to work, you see the guys, and then you get off the next morning or 2 mornings later, and then you see them again 4 days later. And you hear about a baby being born through a department-wide email, or you come back in and a guy, like you said, a guy's like, oh man, my house was flooded. And you're like, why didn't you call me? Like, and it's important to mention that, because that can play into the mental health as much as everything else we're doing, right? Having those relationships, as a military guy, right? We had that in the military. I mean, everybody was together, everybody hung out often, everybody knew everyone's families, right? That was just part of it.
In regards to your career, long career, and still currently, because I know that you're most likely, with your words and wisdom, you mentor other people. Throughout your career, right, we strive to move forward, learn, train. And again, you're the deputy chief of training, which comes with a whole host of things. But through your career line, right, lieutenant, captain, battalion chief, I don't know if in your department then deputy chief or assistant chief is the next thing. There's a lot of management structure. One of the things that I've talked to many people that have gotten promoted, and I'm not I don't go out and talk about leadership and so forth, but having conversations with many of the men and women who have gotten promoted on my former department, lieutenants, captains, chiefs, as I said, all the fires go out eventually, right? But the biggest thing and the number one thing that will keep us up at night is the personnel issues. There's always that 1 or 2 or 3 people that just can't fall in line. But from a behavioral health, mental health standpoint, did your mindset and viewpoint change throughout your career as you climbed the ladder? And if so, how?
Well, absolutely yes, because with promotion comes more responsibility, but also comes with a bigger service demand. In other words, I'm a firm believer, as a captain in a firehouse, you serve your people. It's not the other way around. 45 years ago, that didn't always look like that in the firehouse. A lot of folks were there serving the captain or the station officer, the chief. But our world's evolved, and it's evolved for the better. The job of any supervisor is to serve the people below them. At the same time, in my career, once again, the mental health issue evolved. So it became more and more and more a conversation at a firehouse or at a kitchen table. So I think both things for me happened at the same time. I started going up through the ranks, and inheriting more responsibility and more personnel who I had to serve. At the same time, the mental health was more on the forefront, and we started learning about it. I mean, I came from at the age of 25 was the first time I ever heard the word CISM. I had never sat in a class in any form or fashion in college or in the fire department that talked about mental health. There was nothing. There was no discussion about it. So it didn't even exist. Well, obviously that's not where we're at today. So as it came about, the CISM, I know there's a lot of identified flaws to that process from once upon a time. So we've moved on and built from that. But in 1990, that was the only option we had. But it was at least something. We were at least discussing mental health. So you had people that were involved. You had people that you realized, hey, besides sitting on the tailbed of a pickup truck talking to a couple of coworkers, or 2 days later helping them move and drinking a cold beer at the end of the day, that if there was something else going on, there even existed a counselor out there that you might go talk to. That evolved somewhere along the lines. And I, of course, that's a separate note, but I think that's one of the shortcomings to today's world. With everything I've been involved in, is that we know there's 1,000 counselors anybody can reach out to tomorrow, but finding one who understands the fire service and the psyche that goes behind being a firefighter, that's hard to do. I mean, most counselors are not set up for that, and that's evolved. We've gotten better at that. I mean, you think about almost any fire department or any city, any municipality, they probably offer an EAP program, and it's like, hey, if you need to talk to somebody, it's here, and everybody feels good about it. Well, all it is a box check that says we have a counselor on staff, or here's a phone number you can call. But the question that we ask now is, well, was it worth it? I mean, were they helpful? Was it worth going and talking to them? And now we know a lot of those answers are no. They were a counselor, but they didn't know what to do with somebody who deals with, repetitive exposure, in their own backyard, for what it's worth, to things that alter your mental health or challenge your mental health. So I think what's great about today's world is we have so much more knowledge about the whole thing than we did in 1990 or 2000, or 9/11 taught a whole other layer of the mental health in the fire service. But prior to that, there was no need for it. Nobody asked that. So I think we're on the right road. I think it's been a struggle at times, but so for my career, ironically, as I promoted up through the ranks, it was more and more and more and more focus on the fact that, it's no different than somebody wrenching their knee and having to have knee surgery, and we check up on them and see how the surgery went, how rehab's going. For the first decade or two of my career, mental health was not in that category. Nobody followed up with a question of, hey, how are you doing? Now,
at what point in your career?
80, I could have run into you at a restaurant or a convention, and I could have said, hey, Dan, or hey, Chris, how are you? And in 1980, that meant, how are you?
Right.
Don't tell me fine, how are you? And it's just pleasantries. It was like, no. How's your family? How's your back? How's how's the job? How are you? And we've gravitated away from that. Unfortunately, now it's just a pleasantry. It's like, how are you? Don't tell me. I don't want to know. I just said it to be nice. And that's what I see in today's world, unfortunately. Whereas in 1980, somebody would say, hey, how's things going? And now they wanted an answer. Fine wasn't going to cut it.
At what point in your career or rank did you feel, and maybe not, did you feel equipped to have the discussion in regards to behavioral health? Like if you said to somebody, how are you doing? And you meant that, and somebody didn't take it that way, you're like, no, I need to know how you're doing. And I could imagine too, as you move up the ranks, and again, we're looking at time, right? Time has changed, but also you as a person, because of being a training officer and in charge of training, we all know from NFPA and NIOSH, the whole idea is to train up, and we continue to try to address the issues that have been around forever, right? Injuries and death, and then also behavioral health. And it took the better part of a half century to really focus on behavioral health. But was there a point in time in your career at some rank where Dallas or some other organization offered you the tools, or did you have to then do it on your own and find out? And did you then leave the department better? And we'll get into, and that might play into the fact of when we first met, which is when you, from a chief officer standpoint, supported training your department. But go ahead.
No, I think that's a great question. I'm sitting here trying to think of a good way to explain that. So I'm one of those. So like today, on today's date, if you ask me, do I feel pretty prepared if somebody called me right now and said, hey, I need your help, or I need your opinion, I need your advice, I'm struggling with this, where would I feel like I'm pretty well equipped to know what to do next. But my mentality personally is I always feel like I'm unequipped. That's why I'm reading the next article that's written, or I'm listening to the next podcast. I'm one of those folks. I joke every now and then. I'll speak to a group of recruits at a graduation. I'll be the keynote. And I always tell them the biggest difference between them and me is I'm a better student than they are. Because this industry, I never stopped being a student. Even to this day, I've been retired now for, since the summer of 2023. I still read fire engineering from front to back. I read Firehouse magazine. I read Crackle now, because that's a great magazine that's out there. So you got to constantly keep learning. So for me, I never felt like I was. So the point of your question, I think where you started, is I never felt equipped in my career. There was always that fear to me. Somebody was going to come tell me, hey, or call me at the middle of the night and say, hey, man, I'm about to end this day here. What do I do? And do I say the right thing? And what do I do? I think, and I can't say this because I don't know what other people say behind my back, and I'm one of those people who think about that. But I would like to think that people who know me know that I care. I care about people. I care about them. And I think most of my people that are close, I think even you, Chris, right here in the Dallas area, know, with little exposure you and I have had, if you had to call me and wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning for some reason, you wouldn't say, I'm not calling that guy. You would say, I'm calling that guy. Now, for me, am I equipped to give you what you need at that moment? That's a fear that I have. It's like, I don't know, but I do know I will care. And I do know that I'll travel that road with you, and we'll work on it together, whatever that entails. It may not be me you need to talk to, but I might need to make 20 phone calls when we get off the phone, and I'll find the right person. So I don't think I have ever felt equipped, once again, because I think it's evolved in my career. So yeah, no, I don't think there was ever a class. I'm still not even aware. So I've been through the peer support. I've been through the CISM training, and those were educational moments for me. But what we're talking about with the mental health world, it doesn't fit in a box. It's not like we can package it all up, and if you go to that 8-hour training or 4-hour training, everybody's good. It's a lot more complex because we're talking about people, and everybody has a different view. It's, the same 30 people can go to the same horrific incident, and everybody's going to process it differently, right? I mean, we know the grief process is different for everybody, and our attitudes and our mentality is all over the board. So it's never going to be a box check. I don't think the fire service is ever going to say, hey, we're good on mental health. That's not ever going to happen. It's going to constantly, through the dynamic fact of what it really is, we're going to constantly keep looking at it and working at it. It's like COVID, right? I mean, 100 years from now, they're going to be studying COVID. We lived it, we went through it, but we still don't know what really happened, over the last 5 years. We're still struggling with that. So I think mental health is in the same manner. I think at least today, I see more and more people who don't think it's just a box check, that it's something we have to work at. The job will never be done. I guess that's another way to surmise that. We have to keep working.
That's why they call it practice in medicine. So you're in a good school of thought. And to your point is when we were discussing who we were going to have on the show, when we were talking about mid-level management, Chris's first choice was yours. So you're right in the sense of, but how do people get out there and I'm not going to necessarily say be vulnerable, but like even for me, so I got a degree in psychology back in the 80s. I've been a clinician for 40 years. I've worked inpatient, outpatient. And when somebody calls me, I don't know if I can help them. And some people might go, oh gosh, you have 40 years. I'm like, I know that I can offer them tools, just like as an incident commander, right? You can manage a scene, but does it always go exactly as prescribed or as somebody thinks of? And I always say this is that my dad was an active alcoholic. He was dealing with undiagnosed bipolar disorder and he was suicidal. A lot of different variables in there. I couldn't get him to stop any one of those things, but it was up to him to do that. What I can do is have a conversation, and the reason obviously we asked you to be here and a lot of people on this show is because you're willing to have that conversation. I think you've offered a trajectory in a sense of, from a behavioral health standpoint, and I know this, you know this, we've come a long way since 1985, but we're still a distance out because people are still dying by suicide. People are still losing a job because of mental health. And there are still a number of people out there that are drinking themselves to death. With that said, I don't want to throw you off on this, but if you can, in this, and again, this is only a 60-minute show. If you can tell the next level, mid-level management personnel, I know what I wanted to say too. And so you've been intentional about educating yourself. I think the greater majority of the fire service across the country, unfortunately, have not been overly intentional to do that. With that said, if you can tell the next group of mid-level management personnel what you would have liked to known back when you were in that stage, what would that be?
One of the words I've always heard, I still hear when I do my company officer symposiums, I'll ask lieutenants and captains, what's your number one job responsibility? And almost every one of them want to tell me, make sure everybody goes home in the morning or to take care of the bubbas. But that sounds good. That's a fuzzy thing that makes everybody feel like everybody cares. But what does that mean? Does that mean you allow hazing in the firehouse? Does that mean that you don't follow up with somebody if they're struggling because their child's battling an illness or their spouse and they are struggling in their relationship? It's the warm fuzzy. By the way, backing up, that's not your number one job responsibility as a company officer, but that we'll save that for a management or a leadership class another day. But when you say that, how far reaching is it? In other words, if you take care of your bubbas, why is mental health not in that bucket? And it has to be. The mental, so much of what I see today, the argument from the generational differences. I'm a baby boomer, and for years I heard about the millennials. Well, now the reality is now the millennials are sitting there saying, one of you baby boomers is going to die or retire and get the hell out of the way. So, but a lot of it is not so much the age, it's the fact that our world has changed from those generations. And the fact that people grow up differently, we're so focused on our world today. And I don't mean to get into a philosophical debate, but everybody's only looking through their eyes. I don't know what it's like to live in Chicago. I don't know what it's like to live in McKinney. I don't know what it's like to have red hair. I don't know what it's like to be a person of color. And in our world today, the focus is, but no matter what, I'm right. right? Whatever my view or opinion is, I'm right. And I wish somebody had told me a long time ago, you're only looking through the world at your eyes. Look through for just a second through somebody else's eyes. So if you're the 45-year-old captain with 20 some years on the job, and you come back from a SIDS death or an ugly car crash or suicide or anything, it's a challenge. You've been there, you've done that, you know how you process it. You may think you do, but you processed it. But now you have a 22-year-old that just came back and they've only been on the job for 6 months. And the assumption is they're just like you. They're going to rub dirt on it. They're going to build their own walls. They're going to deal with it, and everything's going to be fine. And we now know there's enough science that says that didn't happen. Everybody's not fine. That person's going to have to process it, especially if it's the first time. Every one of us, every one of you that's listening right now, you went to your first, we call it Signal 27, but your first fatality car crash or your first death, whether it's a fire death or a natural death or a suicide or drowning, you fill in the blank. It's the first time you ever saw that, and it was impactful in your life. It had to be. I mean, if you weren't, we would all be worried about you. So how do you process that? And if you're the company officer and you're trying to get your recruit up to speed on the fans and the saws and the operation of the engine, you also need to be making sure investing in them are they mentally prepared? So I used to tell that to the people I worked with, and this is going back maybe 20 years ago. I told people, like, if you're not physically fit, spiritually fit, and emotionally fit, I don't want you here. Take a sick day. Now, my boss at the time hated my guts because my guys would take off sick. It's like, I don't want a guy here. He and his wife are going through a divorce right now, and his mind's not in the game. He's a liability on that engine. Take a sick day. It's no different than rolling your ankle and spraining your ankle. That's okay to take a sick day. So it's investing in your folks. And I think that investment has to sit with their mental health. You just can't make the assumption that they're just like you, especially if you're the senior guy or the officer. You've got to reach down there to that level. I'll share this with you without getting too long-winded. For the last 5 years of my career, the people I listened to the most in my organization were the people who had less than 5 years on the job. If I ran into you and you said you'd been on a job for 2 years or 3 years, I was overtraining for a long time. So I knew a lot of these guys, and I'd see them and I'd say, how are things going out there? And I really did want to hear them. If I ran into you, Dan, I probably would say, hey, how things going? How's your family? How's your back? Blah, blah, blah. But I already know we think alike. We're from the same generation. But if you're 25 years of age and you've been on the fire department now for 3 years, you have a view that I can't have no matter how hard I try. I can't get that view. So I want to hear what your view is. What did your academy prepare you for what you're seeing? What if you were in charge of the whole process tomorrow, what would you add into your training? And we've heard it. We've heard some of them say, I wish they helped prepare me mentally or emotionally. I didn't know. I mean, so many of you that are listening here right now, you probably would agree with this statement. You come into the fire service, unless you're a generational firefighter, and you all of a sudden now you're going into people's homes all day long, every single day, and you realize people don't live like you do. They don't value life the same way you do. And that's an emotion. I mean, that's powerful. I joke with my church, they want to send money to some foreign Ethiopian foreign country somewhere because of the despair. And I'm sitting there thinking, I can drive you 2.5 miles down the street and show you the same problem right here. You don't have to go to a foreign country to find it. It's right here in your backyard. But they live behind doors and windows that people don't see through. But as firefighters, we're in there and we see that. I've heard because I listened carefully the last 10 years on the job to those with less than 5 years on the job. I ran into so many of them that were quitting, and I'd say, why are you leaving? And they only been on the job for 2 or 3 years. And they said, I didn't realize the despair and the sadness that we see all day long, every day. Just wasn't prepared for it. And I'm going to go do something that's not quite so depressing. Now, others of us that did this said we can thrive off of that in some form or fashion, or at least not have it cripple us. But now we're losing good people. I saw a guy at the one day retiring, and he had been the valedictorian of his rookie class, and he'd only been on 3 years, and he was leaving. And I asked him why, and he said because he didn't realize that the job was going to be that much of a beatdown. And no idea. There was no way that prepared him. And in my eyes, I thought we failed him as the fire department in training them. Now, good and bad. Either we should do a better job of training them so they're prepared for that, or perhaps we do a better job of not even hiring them because maybe they're not the right person for what we're going to see and do. And I don't see fire departments really focusing on that. I see, like, I know McKinney just went from giving polygraph exams, which is a waste of time and resources because it doesn't tell anybody anything. The only person that's going to pass, the person you don't want is your pathological liar, and they're going to pass the polygraph exam. The person that's honest isn't going to pass the polygraph. But you guys have replaced it with a psychology test or a psychiatric evaluation in some form or fashion. That's an investment in your people. That's at least letting them know, hey, we care about you before you even walk in the door here. Are you really right? I know the job looks like you want it, but people don't know what the job really entails. And I think we're doing a better job of evaluating that today.
Yeah. You said so many things I had written down that, because everyone goes home, and I knew that was going to come up, and I agree with it. But something that I think is important for people to hear that you mentioned is if you just take the company officer level for a moment, which I was a company officer as well, but investing in your people and, investing in their mental health can be a conversation with them, right? For so many years, you heard the be seen, not heard as the new guy, right? You're not around the guys, you're out on the apparatus floor studying the rig, and all that stuff is important, right? Being able to do the job physically, like you said, knowing how to do the job, but doing away with this separation of you're the new guy and you're seen, not heard, and having that something as simple as a company officer or a senior man just sitting down with the new guy one-on-one, or the younger guy. Hey, how's your life? How's your family? How's the kids? A 15-minute conversation could be the win that new guy needed that day. And you know what? The fact that he's trying to earn everyone's respect and he looks up to everyone in the walls of that firehouse, that you came to him and asked him, that gave him that win. It was a few years back, but we had a new guy, and I'll never forget. I came home and my wife asked me about the new guy, and she said, "Is he married?" I said, "I don't know." She said, "Does he have any kids?" I go, "I don't know." And she got mad at me. She said, "Why don't you know this?" And this was my wife, who's obviously been along this journey with me for a long time. But to your point, taking care of them and serving them, because you mentioned that earlier, right? It's the company officer's job to serve. What does that look like? It's not just, yes, making sure that's natural, right? Making sure they go home. It's making sure the rig checks are done. It's making sure they make it to training on time. All that stuff, that's not serving them. That's the job happening. But how are they truly serving them and investing back into them? And it doesn't have to be this big maybe you had a really rough shift. Like you said, maybe you went to a couple fatalities, you had a fire, you got no sleep. Maybe it's the next day texting them, right? I had a captain that I worked for previously who we had a really, really, really busy shift and some bad calls happened. And the next day he texted the crew and he said, "Hey, really proud of you guys. We ended the shift with 20x runs, whatever it was." And it was just something as simple as that, right? Just a message on a day off. It's not rocket science.
No, it's just touching base, really, right? I mean, it's the human element that we now. I'm one of those folks. I get mad at the texting world, mostly because I suck at it. But it's and I'm from that generation. But I'm not necessarily good with that. I mean, if I may text, I've got a list of friends every now and then I send a text to just saying, "Hey, how you doing?" But that's not. I'm not going to do that every time. There's going to be times I just call them and say, "Hey, give me a call. I'm going to talk to you. I want to hear your voice. I want to hear, where your inflection is. I'm not here evaluating you. I'm not a counselor. I don't have Dan's background, in understanding, psychology and philosophy and how people operate. But I think that human interaction thing is huge. And that's why I think the cell phone's killing a lot of people without going into that opinion. That's why I'd rather see you guys. I like at least seeing you here right now. I can see your face. I can see Dan just nodded his head. So so there's an interaction there. If I'm texting you or I'm emailing you, that doesn't occur. So you have to have that personnel touch. So I think your officer sending that text out there to everybody saying, hey, is everybody okay? Or, at least giving them kudos for the tough shift they had. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all.
Right.
But I'm also the guy that might just for 5 minutes make that phone call just to say, hey, you doing all right? What's going on? What are you doing?
I want to ask one more question on the topic before we move on.
That's his way of telling me to shut up.
No.
Go ahead.
I definitely want to get this one in though. So we talked about the company officer, but talk about like the battalion chief or the deputy chief for a second in the operational capacity. Usually a lot of experiences, or, the battalion chief comes by the fire station and usually they talk to the captain, right? Like that's who they're going to see because they got to pass on some info, meeting, mail, whatever it is. How important is it? And obviously it doesn't happen every shift, but how important is it, like you mentioned earlier, for that battalion chief to walk in that firehouse and maybe he spends a few minutes talking to the guys, not about the new policy that's coming out, but just checking in with them, right? Mm-hmm. So we talked about, there's the senior man element, there's the company officer element, and then there's that next level. How important is that when you pop in as a deputy or a battalion for no other reason that you're just coming by to check on the guys, shoot the breeze, see what's new?
Right. I think that's huge. So I think if you have a shift the way you get your, the world thrown at you from every angle for 24 hours or 48 straight hours, and then the next shift, the chief came by with a box of donuts, or came by at dinner time with a gallon or two of Bluebell ice cream and said, hey guys, just checking in to say hi, just want to hang out, sit here at the kitchen table with you. Nothing official, nothing. You see, so I think the fact that as a deputy chief or a battalion chief, you now serve a whole lot of other people. You have to use your rank structure. So for me personally, so when I was a field deputy in Dallas, I had the 1st, 5th, 8th, and 9th. 1st, 5th, 6th, 8th, and 9th battalions were under my responsibility, and each of them had 6 firehouses. So I had 30 firehouses that I was responsible for. There's no way that I could go to every one of those firehouses every day. And in Dallas, if you took a firehouse that had a horrible shift yesterday, there were probably 40 of them that had a horrible shift yesterday. So there's no way that you could go out and visit with them all the next shift. Now, unique situations, multiple fatalities, multiple alarm fires, those don't happen every day. But even just the occasional checking in, if I walk into a fire station as a deputy chief, everybody's already uncomfortable, right? Anybody that's in a t-shirt's now trying to get into their uniform. They're trying to make sure they're panted and stuck. They think I'm there for a uniform inspection. I make them uncomfortable. And then every firefighter's worried I'm going to make their supervisor look bad, and likewise. So it's important to use that chain of command. So I would, and I had some battalion chiefs that had to remind me, say, hey, if you're going to go by one of my firehouses, I would prefer a heads up. And I finally told him one day, I said, I understand your point and I don't disagree with you. If I'm going to show up at a fire station under official business, I will never do that without going through you first, in which case you probably will meet me there at that firehouse. But if I just happen to be driving by station X and it's like I haven't been in there in a few weeks, let's stop in there, and I just go walking in there just to say hello or just to sit and have a cup of coffee or a bowl of ice cream, I'm not going through my chain of command doing that. So I told my battalion chiefs, listen, if I go in there without giving you a heads up, this is completely unofficial fire department business. I'm just stopping in there because I give a care, and I'm just wanting to say hello. They can ask me a question. Now, if somebody says, hey, we're having a problem with something, can we talk to you about this? I'm going to probably put a stop to it. I'm going to say, did you go through your officer? Did your officer go through your battalion chief? Because to tell me about your problem right now is circumventing your chain of command and showing disrespect to those individuals. So I would have to make sure I would draw the line. But if I just wanted to swing by and say, hey, I know you guys were first due at that apartment fire last week, and you guys did a fantastic job. Hey, I'm just here to say thank you. I know you're eating lunch. Of course, every one of them is like, hey, chief, you want a cup of coffee? Chief, you want to join us for lunch? It's like, no, I actually just ate, but here's some donuts or here's some cookies for dessert. Just here to say thank you. And you make that investment. Well, you keep using that term, and I've used it, investing in your people. Well, a couple of gallons of Bluebell or an occasional box of donuts or an occasional dessert to go by a fire station and just say hey, hi to the guys. That's investment. That's investing in your folks. And they know that you're there, right? So everybody should know in the chain of command, they can get to me if they have to, right? They can go to their supervisor, their lieutenant or captain. Their lieutenant or captain can go to the battalion chief. If the battalion chief can't help them, they can come to the deputy chief. That's set up that way. That's our chain of command structure. But obviously you want to be able to serve people at the lowest level possible. But if you can't get what you need, at least they can come to me. Well, with 30 fire stations, there's folks that were in my chain of command that had never seen me before. I mean, that's easy to do, especially with the transfer list and promotions. And as much as we move people around in the Dallas Fire Department, or Chicago Fire Department, there's transfer lists that come out, 400 people move or 200 people move, around the organization from shift to shift. So it's just being visible, like, hey, I'm here. I see you. I know you're here. I'm just letting you know that I appreciate what you do. And that's it. Now, could they call me at another time? That's absolutely an option. I'd like to at least leave letting them know that exists, that needed to be an option for them someday. I'm somebody they can call. I don't know if I've answered your question.
No, you did. And I liked how you threw in the part about understanding the chain of command and not letting the lines blurry, right? Because it's real easy when the deputy chief walks in and you're like, oh, chief's here. Can we get this new whatever? Or and so because firemen, right, we're going to exploit our opportunities. But I think that's important. And so I think that, of course, every fireman, right, the deputy chief walks in and they're zipping their boots. It's just a fireman way, right? But I think that there's power in that. I really do. When the deputy chief or the battalion chief stops by for nothing more than to just check in and have a cup of coffee and sit at the bumper, the smoking table, whatever you call it, right?
Well, so Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I was just going to say my fondest memory when I first came on was of two chiefs. One was a battalion chief and one was a deputy chief who, when they showed up, everybody's personality changed. But because I was new and I honestly wasn't from the military, I was like, oh, they're coming to say hi. And that's what they did. They actually came, had a cup of coffee, told a couple of jokes. We sat around a table. And then they left, and there was no other fanfare. You, like myself, and again, you had more promotions than I did, but throughout my lieutenant, captain, and battalion chief training, never once. Yeah, they talked about safety, and if you couldn't get promoted unless you said safety 3 times in your oral interview. And again, it's all the fluff stuff. What does it mean? And do you feel it from that individual? Are they really going to be intentional and have an investment in the personnel? And how are you going to do that, through training and engagement? But not once in my 3 promotions did I have a class where, we had some good, the best classes we had were from the retired guys that had moved up the ranks and closed the doors and said, this is how it is. And what I learned very soon when I got assigned, when we get assigned as a battalion chief, we have to relieve to all 24 battalions, big city, right? And you can't know everybody. So then we get assigned to a spot and I'm like 5 houses, 55 people. I got to get to know everybody. Every single firehouse I went to in my first week was, Chief, why are you here? It wasn't like, hey, how you doing? It was like, why are you here? And I'm like, well, what changed from when I was first on the job to now? And what I basically learned was people showed up when something needed to happen or something happened. If you know what I mean?
Yeah, somebody's in trouble or we're out of our norm.
Yeah. So coincidentally, when you said that, when I came in, I would have some people that would, as I befriended them, because we're human beings first and then firefighters second, although sometimes that line gets blurred. they would say, hey, I remember this vividly, where three people, the senior guy, a mid-level person, and a candidate was like, hey, Chief, can so-and-so wash the rig without his shirt on, have his T-shirt on and without his uniform shirt on. And I said, did you talk to your officer? And they kind of looked at me, and I said, don't mistake me coming here to circumvent the system here. You have a leadership command here that knows the job. When I leave, I know the best thing about me is my ass walking out the door, but you still have to act like grown adults. But my point here is that 6 months later, I didn't show up at that firehouse because of whatever happened. And I tried to make every firehouse. And a gentleman walked up to me, and said, where were you? And I said, why'd you miss me? He goes, you didn't show up last day. So it took about 6 months or 3 to 6 months to change the culture within my just one battalion on one shift to be like, we want you to come by, have a cup of coffee, have a conversation, and just be human beings. But I don't think that's being taught out there. So it's great to hear what you just said, as a battalion chief or a deputy chief. And again, like 30 houses on 3 shifts, how do you make that happen unless you model it and then encourage the rest of the mid-level management to do the same thing? So right. I appreciate that.
So once again, like through the chain of command, the people that I'm responsible for were really only those 5 battalion chiefs. So I need to make sure that they're on the same game plan that I am, which is I'm here, I'm available. You need me 3 o'clock in the morning, because I would have some chiefs that would even tell me, it's like, if we have an incident during the night, do you want me to wait and call you in the morning? I don't want to wake you up at 3 o'clock in the morning with a phone call. And it's like, I'm on the job getting paid. Call me at any time you want. That's not a problem. I'm here. Just call me. That's not a problem. So it was empowering those chiefs to know that. And once again, every one of my chiefs, fortunately, I had 5 great chiefs, and I had several others that transferred in and out while I was there. But if we're serving everybody. And as long as those chiefs were on board, that they're serving their company officers and they're doing a good job to make sure that those company officers know they're serving their people, then I have the peace of mind to know we're doing the best we can with my division. Everybody is serving everybody that we can. Now that's utopic. Obviously, we have personalities that are involved. And fortunately, I didn't have a problem with the battalion chiefs, but there were some of those battalion chiefs that had crews that had officers that came from different generations or different mindsets. And it's like, we're the toughest firefighters. We're not calling nobody, and we're not going to air our dirty laundry or whatever it is, until it did happen. And then I got involved in it, and now it was official business. So what I kept working on was trying to keep pushing that down. We're all here serving each other. Somebody asked me, like right before I retired, they said, are you going to miss being a deputy chief in the Dallas Fire Department? I said, that was just the title of the responsibility I had. I'll tell you what I didn't want to let go of. I didn't want to let go of the title firefighter. I've been a firefighter my whole life. Yeah, Chris, you and I here in Texas, we can go to TCFP. I can look you up right now. You can look me up on TCFP and see what our certification is. You know what it doesn't say? It doesn't say deputy chief. It doesn't say captain. It just says whether you're a basic, an intermediate, an advanced, or a master firefighter. We're all firefighters. That's all it says. And I think that's one of the biggest problems that I see with some officers is they get that entitlement because they've moved up the food chain and they feel like their job is easier and everybody's going to cater to them. And the answer is no. Maybe you're not sweeping and mopping the floor or cleaning the toilets anymore. Maybe the rookie's doing that. But your job is the mental health and the responsibility of everybody in that fire station, whether they showed up physically fit, spiritually fit, or emotionally fit for the tour. That's your problem. You own that. It's in your job description. So if you're investing in your people, like you say, if you and I were joking, Chris, and you said you got the new rookie, and I asked you those same questions your wife asked you, if you didn't have those answers, I would probably tell you the same thing your wife told you. It's like, you should know that. I don't need to know that because, there are 3 layers of supervision from where I'm at. Now, if I ever meet them and talk to them, I'll know that. I will know that. but I would think the company officer would. I mean, it's just like, here's a good example. I remember seeing one of my, when I was over the training academy years ago, we had all the rookies come in, and we had one lieutenant who I think he was trying to pay his earlier career traumas, if you would. He thought he needed to berate everybody and talk down to everybody, and everybody was an idiot. And I know at least Dan and I came through that world where you had somebody in your training academy that talked to you guys like a drill sergeant. And I know, Chris, you did the military, so you had a drill sergeant at some point talk to you like you're the dumbest thing on the face of the earth, and their job was to get you right. But in the fire department, we have a little bit of that, but they were talking down to this. I saw this one lieutenant. I was a captain at the time. I was the fire academy commander, so I wasn't a deputy chief, wasn't even the battalion chief. I was just the captain, but that was the academy commander in the Dallas Fire Academy at the time. This is back 20 something years ago, 25 years ago. And this individual kept berating this rookie, and I knew the rookie had just come back from serving in our military in combat. And I finally had to pull that officer aside and say, do you know anything about that individual? And he said, what do you mean? I said, tell me what they're married and tell me where they're from. And he didn't know the answer to either one of them. I said, then you shouldn't talk to anybody the way you're talking to unless you actually know them. He said, why do I need to know them? They're just rookies. And it's like, you were a rookie at one time and look where you are. I was a rookie one time. Now look where I'm at. It did. If somebody talked to us, which they likely did the day we walked in the door, like you're talking to them, you would have to agree with me right now. It didn't serve you any benefit to be talked to like that. In the military, they talk down to you, right? But then they turn around and build you right up. 100%. In the fire service, sometimes we talk down to those people and we never know for 30 years. As long as you're junior to me, that means something, and I'm going to keep insulting you. That's not beneficial to anybody. And I finally had to tell him, do you know that guy came back out of the military? He's been places you and I can't even dream of being. Why would you talk down to somebody like that? Why don't you show a little bit of respect to that individual? And I had the ability to do that because that was my immediate subordinate, and I was responsible for that. But I wasn't going to tolerate. At least he left that meeting knowing I wasn't tolerating that in my fire academy. That wasn't happening. And he did. He changed his mind. So I think, once again, it's investing in those folks and making sure that your subordinates know they're investing in other people. Does the senior guy know from their company officer that they're supposed to be investing in that rookie when they walk through the door? On everything, not just can you start the fan and can you get water out of the pump, everything else.
It's so true. And I know we're starting to run out of time, but there's a quote on your website I want to read real quick. And I think it was meant for us serving the public, but I feel like it plays right into us serving each other and leaders serving them and all the things. But it says, you can earn trust, you can spend trust, but you never own it. Someone else does, and they're loaning it to you. Right. And I thought that was pretty powerful. And it's the same thing in the firehouse with each other, right? Where I'm trusting you as a chief, I'm trusting the rookie as the rookie, I'm trusting the senior man, right? And trust plays in the middle. It was just, so much of it.
Yeah. And that's a two-way street, right? The rookie has to trust the senior guy. The rookie has to trust their partners on the apparatus. They have to trust their company officer, and the company officer needs to trust everybody. And the only way you can get there is by investing in everybody and making sure they're accountable for their job. And if they're not, we don't berate them for it. You invest in them, you bring them up to speed. And
I think the human factor is the first element of it. Like you said earlier, like if you're not right walking in the walls of the firehouse, right, then it doesn't matter if you can start the fan. It doesn't matter if you can drive the rig. When I was in the military overseas, if a guy was not right up here, there was something going on, he probably wasn't going on that mission with us. He was going to sit that one out, right? Because, it all starts with our mental wellness, our mental well-being. And the cool thing about it is it doesn't, it's not rocket science to be able to create that environment within the walls of the firehouse.
Well, and like you say, if I sent you a rookie tomorrow that didn't know how to start the Hamatra tool and operate all the tools of the Hamatra machine, within 2 hours, you probably can make them an expert of that. And then you can check your box. I've at least trained them to know how to do that. We'll follow up a couple shifts later, see if they still remember it. We'll train on it once a month or however, whatever your training schedule looks like. But the mental health of that individual, that's never going to be a box you check. That's going to be evolving constantly. I mean, and the same thing with the company officer. I mean, of course, Dan, you know this from your background, and Chris, based on what you guys are doing, especially through this great show, is like, so if I was the deputy chief and I found out a firefighter, their spouse left them, their son's battling cancer, they're going through all this crap, and they've gone to their company officer, and their company officers, been trying to get all the help they can and support them and direct them and be a big brother and invest in them and serve them. At some point, if it gets to my level where I'm aware of it, I'm going to be asking the battalion chief, go check on that company officer. How are they dealing with that? I mean, that's a lot of load that all of a sudden now this firefighter dumped in their lap. We know it. It goes all the way up the chain of command. I mean, everybody has that emotional attachment to that one individual. In Dallas, you unfortunately, we've had a tremendous number of suicides over the last couple of years. We've already had, I think, 3 this year in Dallas. And so how does that look all the way through the chain of command, all the way to the chief of the department? That's a scar on everybody. I mean, everybody owns a piece of that. And so how do you process that? How do you deal with it? And I know we really didn't even scratch the surface on mental health. I guess I'm talking too much, but it's our time went way too fast. I didn't realize it was as long as it is.
It is amazing. And for all the listeners know us, if they've watched the show, if you haven't, Chris and I, or one of us or both of us, put together a number of questions to keep the flow of conversation. But what we find out, not only from ourselves, but from the guests that we have, like yourself, is that the conversation takes care of the show. It just continues because, number one, you're willing to have this discussion. Number two, you've done this before. You've been the fabric and a mentor for many. So it's easy to have this conversation. The list of questions that we have that the audience doesn't see, but you see, is just a guide in case we have a lull, which we did not. And several of the questions you've already answered, which was, how do you approach difficult conversations about mental health with members, is you lean into it. You don't stay away from it. And while you may not necessarily be talking to again, from mid-level, there's layers in every department. But also, if you had to talk to the firefighter, you would, I would assume. But in that example of the instructor, you leaned into that, had that conversation with that person, and hopefully they changed their behavior with the individual that they were not interacting well with, which could also affect their mental health and their behavior throughout their career. Another question we have, and you kind of answered it, is how can organizations better support their mid-level leaders in prioritizing mental wellness for themselves and their crews? And you discussed that from you had 5 or more battalion chiefs over your career, and most likely you had those conversations with them of not just saying, hey, good morning to people, but actually asking them how they're doing and how their crew is doing. Much like, and I'd offer this, is I did that one time I recall, asked every officer. So I only had 11 officers in my battalion, but asked every single one of them how they were doing. And in that one period of time, in a week, in our world, we had 2 of their members who spouses were going through double mastectomies. Another individual who's an officer's daughter who attempted suicide. And for the life of me, I can't remember what the other 2 were, but they were significant life events. Now, if you look at workforce across the country, 75% identified that work is a level of stress, and 65% say work is a significant level of stress. You mentioned earlier, from a cumulative standpoint throughout our career of what we're exposed to, and if we don't have people like you in mid-level management and throughout that will focus on people's health and wellness, not just safety standpoint, right? But health and wellness and mean it. There's going to be more people like that 3-year valedictorian that are going to say, I'm out of here. So Chris and I hopefully the audience appreciates all not only the time that you've given today, but this didn't happen by accident. This happened over a 45-year career. Not that everybody else has to wait 45 years because it's like, how do I get there? How do you get wisdom? It takes time, right? But it also takes intentionality and training and education. So all the stuff that Chris and I had talked about of what we wanted to ask you and drive home with whoever might be listening, you answered. So really appreciate your time and what you've done and really what you're going to do going forward as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I know you guys, I know Chris had sent me a few questions and I was looking, there's like 6 of them we never got to. But,
maybe you would just have to do a part 2, Chief.
Well, I'd be honored to, but I still have a lot of passion. There was a lot of things I wanted to still discuss too. So if you want to circle back on that, I'm a firm believer because I've come to understand, nobody does this job anywhere. I don't care what department, who's listening. If you're a single firehouse fire department or you're from a big city like Chicago or anywhere in between, nobody does this job for any length of time without baggage, without scars. And everybody processes that differently. And I know there's a lot of, macho mentality in the fire service. One of the benefits, I'd like to make a quick plug on this, and I maybe should have alluded to this earlier. In Dallas, when we started the CISM team years ago, I was not part of it when they started, but I got on it, like I said, 25, 30 years ago. There were benchmarks that were absolutes. In other words, if you went to certain incidents and certain things happened, you were debriefed. There was no options. Nobody called the captain and said, hey, how's everybody doing? And the captain could say, everybody's doing good. I'll keep an eye on my guys. We took that out of their hands. Now, we didn't. It's still your job to look at the guys and take, I know I say guys, I'm talking about the men and women in your firehouse. Your job is to take care of them, but you're all being diffused here and you're out of service until we can get the team together. And we're going to come out there and visit with you. No options. No. And I can't tell you how many times I was a member of that. And there was always one member. A lot of times it was the officer and they'd be sitting there in their chair and they're like, let's get this over with. I don't know why we're here. We shouldn't be here. And probably 90% of the time, that very same individual was wrapped up in emotions before we were done, because they didn't know what to expect. And when we got down to the nuts and bolts with at least those that are involved with peer support and even the previous CISM mentality, that no matter how tough you are, no matter how good you look on the outside, there is a whole lot of stuff that's underneath the surface there that when you start talking about, you start hearing your other teammates or crew members or personnel that you responded with, and you hear their perspective and you hear their emotions, it becomes powerful. And you realize this is a bigger thing. It's not just something as simple as, hey, we're brushing the dust off. We're going to go to the next run, next fire in 20 minutes. Every firehouse that had a fatal car crash today or yesterday or the day before, there's going to be another one in the future. We're going to be responding to that. But how you process that has been ignored for way too long. And at least we're having the discussions, and at least there's forums and there's podcasts like yourselves that are reaching out there saying, hey, once again, we're a student of this industry. At no time are we going to stop. We're just now finding, the more we dig into this, the more we realize needs to be addressed. And I think that's, we didn't talk about alcohol or drug abuse or PTSD and all other things I've been exposed to in my career, especially through the line of duty deaths that I've been involved in. But no matter who you are, it does need to be addressed. So in Dallas, we were lucky because we didn't have to have, hey, Cap, are your guys okay? Yeah, we're good. We don't need CISM, or we don't need a peer support intervention. That's been removed from that. It's automatic. You're going to get it either way. And I think that helped in Dallas. That's my.
Well, I'll give you a plug in a sense, and just respectful of everybody's time too, is that this stuff has been going on forever. It takes people like yourself and Chris and others that are out there to be the voice of something and make it the fabric of the department, and not after the dam is broke. After the dam is broke is too friggin' late. It has to be part of training, part of, again, the fabric of it. And one of the reasons I think that CISM didn't work for many years in our department was because it was too little too late. And I'll just leave it there. But when it becomes the fabric of it and people believe in it, and people like yourself from various different ranks make it intentional, other people then model that behavior. And I'll just say this, because you've shared with it before the show, and I know this from 7 years ago when our friend, our mutual acquaintance, Casey Ellsworth from Dallas Fire, came to you after a significant event. Your answer was, let me think about it. Let me, how much is it going to cost or whatever. Your response was, whatever you need, I'll get everything else out of the way to make it happen. And very few people do that. And if they say that, sometimes they don't always mean that. And you made that happen to the point where, as a friend of Casey, now Casey's in a position with a couple of other people that there is a standalone peer support section that while it, and again, I'll say only took 3 or 4 years to happen. Some people, everybody wants things done yesterday, but it takes a while to make behavioral health the fabric of it. But it is the fabric of the Dallas Fire Department now, with somebody that came to you and you cleared the path, and it still lives to today. So kudos to you. And hopefully with the 30,000 other fire departments across the country, if people wanted to know how you did it or why you did it, either we'll have another show on this, or if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, Chief, how do they do that?
I do have a website. It's chiefdeyear.com. My email is chiefdeyear@gmail.com. Anybody, or you can call me on my cell phone number. You can find that with just Googling up DeYear. You'll find that pretty quick, because I do a lot of public speaking. But and by fact, anybody that's listening, I have no problem if you reach out. I would welcome comments. I would welcome, because once again, I am still a student of the fire service. So any suggestions or advice anybody has, I'm all for it. If you think that there's something else struggling in your organization and you just would like some advice, whether I can give it or not, I would do like you and I talked earlier, Dan, or I can at least find somebody else whose number I can give you that can probably help you do that. What I would like to empower everybody with is, if you're a listener and you're thinking, God, my organization or our department really could use this, but I'm just a firefighter, or I'm just a driver, I'm just a lieutenant. I'll have to wait till I'm the chief, or I'm the deputy chief or assistant chief, and I can make this happen. You're wrong. And Casey Ellsworth's a perfect example. If you have the passion, what we're talking about is not rank structure. We're talking about taking care of each other, and rank should not have a play in that. Rank has a responsibility to that, which should be something positive, not a hindrance. Remember, we're serving down. So if a firefighter wants to start a CISM or a peer support or invest in mental health in their organizations, start the ball rolling. Quit waiting for somebody else to do it. And if you're not sure who to talk to, I know I'm looking at 2 other people on the screen right now. I know you guys they could call you in 5 minutes, and you guys will be helping in any way you can. They're welcome to call me as well.
Well, just to close out, again, thank you for what you've done, what you're doing, and what you'll do in the future. When Chris introduced you, he forgot that you were the 2020 Instructor of the Year, in Texas. And he also didn't recognize the fact that you retired on my birthday, July 18th. So
Okay.
we'll work on it on our end, Chief. We keep on trying to do better.
Listen, no disrespect.
July 18th. Okay.
Chris, you want to close us out?
Yeah. Thanks for listening to our show. Sounds like we'll have a part 2 someday. Appreciate it.
Be honored.
Remove carcinogens and get your gear compliant clean with Unimac laundry equipment. Find it at alliancelaundry.com/fire.
Welcome to Mental Health Monthly with Dan DeGrice and Chris Muscle.